And so meditation has really helped me it's like exercise for your brain to catch these things when they first happen before that trench gets too deep.
Hey, I'm Joe Fier, and welcome to the Hustle and Flowchart podcast. This is where we talk all about building businesses so they give you the freedom and fuel for your life. I'm not here to help you build a billion-dollar business, but I am here to help you create a business with systems that work for you so you can make more money than you need just by working part-time. You know, I was a chronic hustle mode kind of guy, and I want to share my experiences and mentors I've met along the way to help you reframe things to be the most effective as an entrepreneur. I wish I had this guidance and insight when I was younger, so that's what I'm doing here for you. Please share and enjoy. Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Hustle and Flowchart podcast. My name is Joe Fier, and of course, my job here is to bring you interesting folks who are doing big things in business and expanding themselves and creating more happiness or contentment. This is a reference to the episode here. And this time I brought on Gregory Shepard, and he is an incredible entrepreneur. He's built and sold 12 plus businesses in various fields. He's an author. Upcoming book, Startup Science, is coming out later this year. You can get info at gregoryshepard.com. And this guy has been fascinating. He reframed a lot of stuff that you'll hear during this episode when it comes to happiness, like I mentioned a moment ago, and how that can be reframed a little bit and probably take a lot of loads off of our backs as entrepreneurs. This is a big thing that he wants to bring to founders. And in his program and upcoming book called Startup Science, his mission is to really help founders at all levels, all ethnicities, all walks of life. Doesn't matter how much funding you have or the lack of mentorship. He wants to democratize what it takes to create a great company as an entrepreneur, as a founder, and give the tools and the perspectives of a lot of mentors, including from his own research and studies. And it's fascinating. And as someone who has autism, has dyslexia, he is one that has been able to use the power of his mind specifically to change the way he thinks and acts and shows up. And he tells us, he deep dives into how he does that in this episode and talks about a lot of things he's never talked about elsewhere, including some amazing quests that he does every single year. I mean, we're talking about diving with great white sharks and swimming marathons and doing this with a purpose. I mean, it's all to challenge and expand what he's doing. So enjoy this episode. I invite you to take notes, reach out to Gregory at gregoryshepard.com. Find him on all the social channels. This guy's incredible. He's a new friend of mine, and I'm happy to introduce him now to you. So enjoy this episode, and I'll catch you in a moment. Gregory, we're finally hitting record. When we can spend 15 minutes jamming, first time meeting, it's going to be a great episode. So thanks for joining me today, man.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I mean, you reached out, and I peeked at what you're doing. And as we've been jamming, there's so much that I feel like a lot of folks can relate to here. You have a colorful background, not speaking about your actual background, but yourself, personally. And some of these interesting stories from, I mean, I don't want to give away all the secrets. I feel like you tell it so much better, but I'm not worthy.
No,
it's not. But yeah, I mean, I don't even know where to start because you've been in the startup game for a long time. You've sold many companies. You invest. You're in San Diego. San Diego brother. You have a great beard. But your background, I think, fascinates me the most in where you came from. I can relate to bits of that. You've done a lot, and you've come from a really hard place in the eyes of a lot of folks. But I know that's your life, so you wouldn't know any different.
Yeah, that's true.
The best way to start, I mean, you mentioned foster care was in your life.
Yeah.
Autism. You've scaled massive companies almost to sold for almost $1 billion. You met Barack Obama twice, you mentioned. I mean, you do stuff with the military. It's very colorful, and that's why I say colorful. So it's also empowering, I feel like, for a lot of folks. So what you're doing right now, I know, is interesting because you're helping founders. I guess we'll start there, and then maybe we work a little backwards.
Okay. So the way the sequence is, because of autism and dyslexia and synesthesia and savant, they call it savant syndrome. It makes it sound like a disease. I don't like that one. But anyway, I've had a hard time, and my family's foster and adopted and everything. So it's been a pretty hard road. And I barely graduated from high school, but I started businesses when I was like 16. By the time I was 19, or I think it was at the end of my 19, 20th year, I was running a bank that I started, a federal loan. It was a non-depository lender. And then after that, I did a applied environmental biotechnology company. And then when the internet came out, then it was just software and internet from that point forward. I did 12 in total, 4 private equity awards for transactions between 250 and a billion, 2 companies to eBay. And for when we first did the transaction, I was this chief strategy officer for eBay Enterprise, and then the chief technology officer for eBay Enterprise. And then we bought all the companies away from eBay that they had and created our own thing and bought and sold a whole bunch. It was just a crazy ride. And then, like I was trying to figure out how to give back. So I went into politics and was a congressional campaign chairman for congressional candidates trying to get women and people of color into Congress. And then I got really frustrated with that whole situation and decided that I was going to learn more about what I had learned. The reason why I was going into politics is because 4% of people have the ability to get out from check to check living. The majority of those people, I mean, the ones that do it through a windfall. And that's like lottery, believe it or not, inheritance, so on and so forth. And the big piece was starting a business, but then 90% of the people failed trying to start a business. And because of my background, I was like, okay, I'm going to dig into that one. So I put 500 grand into a fund, and then I hired 5 different people to start a project to research why, when, and how founders failed. And it still is going on. It started in 2016. It was supposed to only be 5 years, but it keeps going. And we did I did 2,100 interviews, more than that now. I lost track, but the last time I looked at it, it was 2,100 interviews with founders that failed, founders that succeeded, investors, accelerators, so on and so forth. And then I got a book deal, but I'm like, I read and write at like a 4th grade level because I have level 5 dyslexia, but I got people to help me and wrote a friggin' book, which is pretty crazy for somebody that can't hardly read that well. And then I started putting together a curriculum, a school program to help kids, and it expanded into adults. And then it became a full-on platform that teaches entrepreneurship and helps people avoid the main reasons why entrepreneurs fail, and it has everything you would need as a founder inside of it. And then I started selling that to universities, accelerators, government programs, like all kinds of places. And now there's like thousands and thousands of founders in there taking classes and doing things. And I get to watch people build amazing things and not fail. So it's really, really, really very fulfilling. I love it.
I love how you identified that too with your background and knowing how, I guess, society is, how politics are, and where the lack was, because I agree. I mean, there's so many people that maybe have this dream. They have some kind of dream, obviously, and they want to create something and help others, to relate to what they're already doing. But the business thing is just prime for failure for so many if you don't have the framework, insights, advice, mentors, structure.
Yeah. I mean, like when you look at the data and you look at, these failure reasons, right? It's sort of like a tree at the top. Everybody sees above the soil, and you see that it's all underneath there. It's all in the roots. So in the top, it'll say like, a lot of them came down to like bad decisions, right? So then we had to dig in and be like, okay, how did they make the bad decision? And then that ended up in bad advice, right? So then we're like, okay, who was giving the bad advice? And that ended up being mentors and investors mainly. They're not doing it on purpose. It's more like a process of them never having, like there'll be a mentor who's like a one-hit wonder who did one deal and all of a sudden they think they're, or a mentor who is a really good sales and marketing person, but not good at other areas, and they're trying to spread themselves through it. Investors who have the lens of an investor on and never have been an operator, trying to get in and tell people how to do operations, and they have no right. They should not be doing that.
No.
And a lot of it, is caused from the people that are supposed to help them that are actually hurting them, and they're not doing it on purpose. They're just, everybody's an opportunist, right? So So what I was trying to do is like give the entrepreneurs real solid information so that they could judge the people that they're talking to and the advice that they're given on their own, instead of being held hostage by the advice because they don't have any other option.
Yeah.
So I spent a really considerable amount of time and money building out all that stuff. And it's really, really cool. Like it really, really helps them, and I love that part of what I do. And, on the other stuff, that's just stuff that I do to keep myself in a place of struggle, because I think struggle is really, really healthy. Like your body's cells don't regenerate unless they're under stress, unless they're struggling, right? That's why people do the cold showers and the fasting and stuff, right? And plants that survive are the ones that had the hardest struggle, and people are no different. So I do these question stuff that we were talking about before the call in order to keep myself in a place of struggle. And it always makes me remember that I'm just real and I'm not better than anybody else. I'm not smarter than anybody else. And money doesn't make you more important,
Man, that's so powerful. I love the struggle angle and not going away from it. It's like I think it's Tim Ferriss talks about that. Or Anti-Fragile is another Nassim Taleb talks about, just putting stress on the system and it gets stronger. And there's in quests, I love how you integrate that. We were chatting about that before we hit record, and you have something each year, a challenge or a quest that you can embark on. And I guess rattle off a couple of these, but also I'm curious, was this something that you always had in mind because of your upbringing or anything else, or was it something you learned, and why?
It started because I wanted to get out of high school.
Okay, that's a good reason.
I was like, this year, I'm going to try all of my energy just to get out of high school, And then the next time I was like, oh, I'm going to try to win a bodybuilding contest, because I was bodybuilding so I wouldn't get beat up, because I was getting beat up all the time and I didn't want to get beat up. And I saw the football players were bigger. So I was like, okay, I'm going to start lifting weights and maybe they'll leave me alone. And so I did that. And then I went through to, bungee jumping, skydiving, hang gliding, base jumping, wrestling crocodiles, racing Indy cars. I swam a marathon last year, ran a marathon, rode a bike 500 miles. It goes on and on, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot. This year, I haven't told anybody yet, so you're the first one to find out, but I'm doing a 30-day water fast next month. So
I've heard good things about those, actually. Yeah, dry fasting, right?
And then my reward for doing that is wing walking, which is where you walk on the edge of an airplane wing while it's flying. And
so that's next year. That's what you have planned.
That's going to be both of them this year, because you have to get to a certain weight in order to get out on a wing. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll be at the after that. I'll be definitely able to do that,
So your habit stack, it's BJ Fogg talks about that. I've had him on the show, and he talks about, stacking things and kind of stacking two quests, I guess, quest stacking.
Yeah, for sure. The things that I've done, it sounds like I'm just saying these things, but when you're going to swim 6.5 miles in the ocean, in the Pacific Ocean, that is, I couldn't even make it across the pool the first time. I would have asthma problems and all kind of stuff. And I was afraid of getting in the water. It took me 3 months to get past my chest in the water. Wow. I was afraid because I went swimming with the sharks and I saw them eat like seals, and it was terrifying. It like really did a number on me. So like, it sounds easy to talk about these things, but they are really hard. And the fact that they're really hard keeps your tolerance for struggle and your tolerance for doing things that are really hard at a higher level, meaning like, it's so easy for people to doubt themselves, or be like, man, I don't know if I could do this, or think that something is too big for them, or think that they can't do something because of, the pigmentation of their skin, or the gender, or where they came from, or whatever disability, And I'm trying to show people that I did a TED talk on this, to try to show people like, look, you actually can do things that you don't think you can do. And the more you take on doing things you don't think you can do, the more you think you can do,
Yeah. A picture of this GIF in my mind. I think I saw it on Twitter or something the other night. It's like, you think this big boulder is like insurmountable, and then you start to roll it or pick it up or however, and then the more you do that, it's just like an everyday task, or at least it's part of you. It's integrated somehow. So yeah. And I know, like, I'm big on entrepreneurship and happiness, and because there's some stats out there that show that people who take on business for themselves are less happy than those that are employed. Or, there's a lot more stressors that we put
Mm-hmm.
on our back. And I'm sure I know you can relate there. And who can't? If you're taking on these challenges, you're creating the path for yourself. And that's what's so cool about what you're creating with the whole startup science, everything with the platform and
Thank
your
you.
fund. Yeah. And because I genuinely, like, my dad committed suicide. I talked about it a lot on here
Oh
3 years
man.
ago, right
Wow,
before
dude.
my
I'm
daughter
so
was
sorry,
born.
man. That's
Thank
hard.
you. I learned so much. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot that, and it came down to habits and pushing yourself and doing the things you love, but also, like, I'm thinking of the quest, the way that you're taking on life and not just letting it happen. You're going after it, and there's something new, and you're, like I said, yeah, like, it makes you this resilient in everything. You don't
Yeah,
second
yeah.
guess yourself anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I am, pretty ironclad at this point in most areas, but my armor has holes, and I'm constantly trying to make sure I get them plugged up with some sort of a challenge or something. But
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like, to your point about entrepreneurship, I mean, entrepreneurship is not like, happiness to me is an emotion. It's not a state of being.
Mhm.
Like, you experience happiness from time to time. You're not just happy.
True.
The
Yeah.
trick is being content,
I like that.
and then
Okay.
have some floating happiness happen in and out of your contentment, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And for me, like, in my life, I realized, look, I'm not going to, like, be happy. And people say, "Are you happy?" I'm like, "Well, at the moment, no. I mean, but am I content? Yeah." And the difference is just levels of satisfaction with your life. And I think that, like, when you're starting a business, the level of satisfaction you have in your life is far above anything else, right? You feel like when you're creating a business, you're creating something out of vapor. Like,
Hmm.
you put on this podcast, right? And you just had this idea, I'm going to start a podcast out of nothing, out of thin air. And then you created a podcast, and now you have this really successful podcast. Like, I mean, that's amazing. And when you feel like you doing those sort of things, it brings contentment to your life.
Yeah.
And the interaction with people, like I have with you earlier today and right now, because you're such a cool cat, brings me moments of happiness.
Hmm.
I think that entrepreneurship has extraordinary amounts of stress, but stress is also a state of mind, because these are all just chemicals, right? Like, you think things and it releases chemicals. You hear things, whatever your sensories are, they produce chemicals, and those chemicals cause you to feel a certain way, right? That's how it works. So once you realize you're under the influence, and you realize that in order to prevent yourself from being under the influence, you have to get control of your mind. And a lot of people go, I ask people, do you have control of your mind? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, no, you don't. Because right now, if I started to yell at you, you would not be in control of your mind. And that happens under stress. That happens under anxiety. That happens under sadness, like when your father left. And, it's like, you learn to control your mind, you learn to control the chemicals, and then you can control your life,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah, I love the reframe and the perspective, because it's very true. It's a state of mind, and the contentness is, yeah, it's the through line, I guess, through it all. And
Yeah.
it's the glue behind, with the valleys and the peaks that come with being a person at the end of the day. And I love that. No, thank you for
Yeah,
that.
and if people say, happy, they always use this being happy word. And I'm just like, I mean, that's like reaching for the stars. I mean,
It
that's
really
like so far out of reality. I mean, we're not in a movie,
Mhm.
and shit happens, right?
Yep.
So maybe don't reach for happiness. Be happy when it happens, be like, oh, awesome, I'm having a moment of happiness, but reach for contentment, because that's where the real balance comes in. And being somebody with autism, I'm constantly having to kind of keep my shit together.
I'm sure, yeah.
It has strengthened my ability to have control of my mind, and I urge founders to do that, because there's neuroplasticity is the concept of, your brain is trying to think of something, it's trying to do something, it's trying to make itself more efficient. So the more you think about a subject, the more efficient that neural pathway becomes. It becomes bigger, like goes from a trail to a freeway,
Yeah.
to a 4 or 5 lane freeway. So if you're thinking about things constantly like stressors, you're basically brainwashing yourself. You're creating what you're not trying to create, because your brain is optimizing for that thought. So it's optimizing for a larger pathway, right?
Yes.
So, what I tell people is, I'm like, listen, the worst thing you can do is dwell and think about the things you're afraid of, or dwell and think about the things that you're stressed about. It's better to, even if it's a completely different subject, is to not think about those things and use a different neural pathway. Like one of the analogies that one of my mentors did is he's had this like a small piece of wood, and he had this, and it was on his desk, and he had this piece of a key, and he would rub it on the wood and rub it over and over. And he would say, "You see that little trench that's on the wood?" And I'm like, yeah, I see it. And then he goes, "Now I'm going to put my key right next to it." And he tries to scrub right next to it. It keeps falling back into the ditch, right? So you can't just move slightly over. You have to move far enough over to create another neural pathway, the ditch representing a neural pathway.
Right. I follow.
So, you know what I mean? So I always tell people, I'm like, listen, the key to contentment is to control your own mind, and then your chemicals and the rest of the stuff that you feel, because, we don't feel our thoughts, we feel our chemicals. So if you do that, then the rest of what you feel changes, and then you can get to a better place,
Oof, yes, 100%. Wow. This is big, Gregory. I've already written down a few notes. I'm going to definitely, think a lot deeper on this whole thought, because it's true. As I'm like, got this little like arrowhead thing in my mind, or in my hand, I'm always kind of rubbing this. And it's kind of like what you were just talking about with itch in the wood there.
I mean, like, I'll tell you this interesting thought I had. I was in Israel last month, and I was speaking at a conference in Israel, and I went to the Wailing Wall. I went to Jerusalem and stuff, and I saw the people there, and they were praying over and over, and they're reading the same chapters and doing the thing that they do. And I was just thinking about, man, how optimized is that neural pathway?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that thing is wide open. And that made me think about people that are in a state of depression, and everybody goes through states of sadness, right? It's just like happiness. It comes and goes, and contentment is the middle, right? Happiness is the top and the extremes, right? And when you're in a position where you have that sort of, that kind of incredible sadness that happens, the best thing to do is to try to branch out of it and start creating a new neural pathway. That's why a lot of people, I think, stay depressed, because they're widening that neural pathway, and they're optimizing for something that they're not intentionally trying to optimize for.
And it's comfortable, right? It's that groove that it's easy. It feels easy in the moment, even though it's not uncertain. People like the misery of certainty, or they avoid uncertainty. That is, they love certainty, and that could be the depressive state, or a lot, joy, pure joy. So this is fascinating. Is this something that you've worked on a lot with? I mean, with your neuro, just all the qualities that you have in yourself, and to create? Because I feel like you've been so productive since 16. You were saying, I think it's rattlesnakes, right? Like you started selling.
I caught rattlesnakes. I used to take a green stick, and cut it down the middle, and then put a twig in between it. And then I would come up behind the snakes because the stick was long, and stick it in the dirt around their neck, and the little twig would break. And because the stick was green, it would snap closed and trap them. And then I could come up behind and grab their neck and throw them in a feed sack and take them to the place.
I need you sometimes out here. I got an acre, and I sometimes spot those. I'm like, I don't know what to do with them. Watch out. So, I mean, like, so with this topic of contentmentness and the neuro pathways, like, is this something that's been on your mind, because of, for yourself, like for your own doing? I'm sure,
I mean, I think probably, I don't want to speak for all of my tribe, but I think a lot of us have problems with, depression and that sort of stuff going up and down all the time. And so you're constantly trying to keep yourself in between the rails, And so I wouldn't say I'm a master. I don't know if it's even possible, but I do a tremendous amount of meditation and try to get control. I find that meditation helps me recognize my thoughts and then deal with them. Like when I first started meditating, I had this incredible Buddhist monk guy who taught me, and he says, everybody thinks that meditation is about thinking nothing, but it's not. It's impossible to think nothing, right?
Right.
And that's called transcendence, and rarely does it even happen to anybody.
Right.
But if you just close your eyes and you just notice your thoughts, that is success, right? So you just see them. And as soon as you notice your thoughts within a fraction of a second of having them, I mean, if anybody's meditated before, you sit there and you're pretty deep into a thought before you go, whoa, wait, what am I doing? And then you go back to, try to go back to the breath. Well, the faster you realize what you're thinking, the faster you're going to realize that in your whole life. So sadness sneaking up on you, a thought that's going to cause sadness, right? Because there's usually a daisy chain of effects that causes the outcome. So, you can have that thought where you're thinking, oh, I don't want to be thinking about that, right? Same thing. And so meditation has really helped me it's like exercise for your brain to catch these things when they first happen before they get too before that trench gets too deep.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great way to describe it, because there's, so many ways meditation's described or how you can practice, but just that simple noticing of a thought, but also the reasoning why you would want to notice a thought in that moment, as it's like
Yeah.
a sapling popping up out of the soil. Be like, pull that one, or, let's focus on the oak that might be growing that's a lot better
Yeah.
and
Yeah. And
branch that out.
people always say like, oh, I have my best ideas when I'm in the shower, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's just because you're not distracted. It's the same as meditating, right?
Mhm.
You're just not distracted. So, and where people say, oh yeah, I can't go to sleep because then my mind goes crazy. It's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So when you meditate, you still do that stuff, but it's like you're organizing. I think of it like defragging your brain.
Yeah. Yeah.
The old defrag of your
I do.
computer?
Yeah.
Because what happens is like with the old disk is the disk is spinning. And when you hit save, it's saving all over the disk like a record player, but they're rows and columns, right? And it saves in these little ditches, but it's spinning all the time. So it saves the information all in random places. And then when you defrag, it collects them all and puts them together. So it's faster, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're meditating, you're defragging. And so before I started meditating, I felt like, constantly like all over the place and having a hard time getting to sleep and all that kind of stuff. And then when I started meditating, I realized, wow, like it really works. And it's sort of like looking at dirty water, your life being like maybe muddy water.
Mm-hmm.
And then after it's clear water. And you can see through it to the things that matter, but you're not like looking through this fog of like fragmentation of all these random thoughts and things that bothered you or things that made you happy, like kind of broken into so many pieces that it's like a fog.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
It does. It organizes maybe those particles into a mud ball over here that you have organized more or less, kind of like defragging. You can identify things, maybe like, as a whole fog or a mess. How do you organize your attention and how do you give it to the right thing and prioritize?
Yeah. Like when I was I was getting ready for the swim, and that was a really hard quest, man. I'm telling you that
Swimming's tough, man. Swimming is a rough.
Especially in the ocean with like waves and currents and tides and swimming through big giant patches of seaweed wrapping around your face. I mean, it's pretty.
San Diego, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I had like seals pop up next to me. It was just terrifying. I got stung by a stingray one time.
Oh, geez.
In the leg. But, I would meditate and I would sit there on the beach and I would meditate and I would see myself doing what I was trying to do. And I do this all the time. And that's because your brain doesn't know if you're doing it for real or not. It's experiencing something. So this is why all the Olympic athletes and everybody say, if you are, rehearsing in your brain, you do better in real life because you're creating a neural pathway and strengthening it. And then when you do the thing, you're automatically better at it. And you're
visualizing, right? Through it all. Yeah.
Yeah. It's incredibly effective. Much more. People always ask, they're like, if you were to say, like, what is the best thing that you do in your life that helps you become what other people think are successful? It's meditation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with you describing the deepness of how to apply it and your background, but all of us can relate. Doesn't matter what your background is. You just apply it to your own thinking and how you're operating. We're all unique in that way.
Yeah. Like also, like if you think about this, so I'm a huge physics nerd, right? So if you think about atoms, right, and quantum physics, which is just subatomic parts, smaller than atoms, right? Subatomic particles, which are just little things that they can't see, but they knew they were there, sort of like a current, right?
Yeah.
They all carry just two things, energy and information, right? And the energy, I think, is just to move the information. So really, they're just full of information. So when you're meditating, and they know this through science, you're changing the particles with new information. So, and we're made of those particles and everything's made of those particles. So I always picture like I'm breathing in these neutral subatomic particles and then I'm converting them into fresh, really strong, the things that I want, and then exhaling them back out into the world. Right. So it's
okay.
like
So you're sharing them with the world. You're not, breathing out the bad or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Okay.
And then it makes me feel good about what I'm doing. Like I have this visualization of, seeing these little particles, and taking them in and then them picking up my vibe. And then, I like to be around other people because, you get their vibe and it's really cool. There's this documentary called Water and they take water and they expose it to all of these different situations, people that are being nice to it, people that are being mean to it, music, and the water picks up the emotions of what's around it.
I've
And
seen this. Yeah. The
oh
pictures
man.
of how it
Yeah,
changes.
they had this chemical that they put in the water sealed completely in glass. There's no way that the chemical could have leaked out. And the water was toxic after a week.
Whoa.
So
Wow.
those are subatomic particles. That's how it moves, right? So do you see my point? Like
Oh,
you
yeah.
can really think about things, science through traditional science and neural pathways, through quantum physics and subatomic particles. Everything points to this idea of get control of your mind. And going back to struggle, that helps you get control of your mind, because struggle is you have to conquer it and then you have control over that aspect, right? So that's like my sort of secret sauce. I've never talked about that on a podcast before.
Thank you for sharing, because it makes all the sense in the world. And I love how it plays also in the context of what you do for founders and other entrepreneurs who are starting up in probably the most stressful time. Not saying it doesn't go away, but at least maybe this is the fertilizer, whatever's in the soil before that tree that you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, there's two sides, right? There's two types of founders. There's a visionary founder and a subject matter expert founder. And the visionary founder is coming from the outside in, and the subject matter expert is coming from the inside out. And those two founders, they both have the same thing, and that is that the art is the idea and building the business is a science. So I call it startup science, right? Because it is a science, it's a process. And when I was looking at this, the only way to execute in science is to have a clear head. So you have to get control of yourself, or you're going to run yourself off the rails. And so that's like, a really big component of being successful as a founder, is having the ability to deal with high stressful situations and not become part of the problem. Like when I was getting ready for the book, when I was doing the initial research, I interviewed like the Navy SEALs and the first fighting wing of the Air Force and smoke jumpers and the CIA and SWAT teams. And I mean, like I was trying to figure out, how do people with highly organized infrastructures handle unorganized chaos, because that's the life of a founder, and then create a way to put that into curriculum so that they can sort of be prepared for these things. Like one of the classes we have is on wargaming, which is one of the things that I learned about. And so, the idea of being a founder, I mean, it's hard, and you got to be willing to take a beating. Like you have to be pretty tough and gritty, and like, it's like walking in the ring with Mike Tyson, right? I mean, you're going to get hurt, and it's going to be
punched.
hard.
It's win. Yeah. And how hard.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to be able to, have thick skin and get through it. But man, I got to tell you, like the rewards of creating something that somebody else feels valuable and they're willing to pay millions of dollars for, it makes you feel pretty like, wow, like I can't believe I did that. It's really, it's addicting. That's why I keep doing it over and over again.
I could tell, and I've experienced my own little corner of that. And I guess I've never labeled myself a founder, but at the same time, we're all founding our own things, whatever venture, whatever scale that we choose to grow it. So I think anyone here listening can definitely relate.
Yeah, you're the founder of this podcast, right?
I'm right. And I did have a co-founder for a while, but now it's mine. I have reinvigorated it myself. So I got to give credit where credit's due there.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But Gregory, so book is coming out later this year?
Yeah, it's called Startup Science. Yeah, it's coming out later this year. And the website, GregoryShepard.com. If you go there, if somebody wants to go there, there's a lot of stuff on there, but there's a way to pre-register for the school and for the book. And then I'm going to be giving a ton of those away to founders that don't have any money. So
cool.
Yeah.
Right on, man. Well, hey, anything I could do to help once that thing's launched and live, I'm happy to, because I feel your mission, your heart, and I love how open and inclusive you are with your mission, because it's unique and we need more of it. So appreciate you, my friend.
I appreciate that.
Of course.
Yeah, you're a cool cat. I really do appreciate like you having me on your show and everything. So thank you.
Appreciate you, man. Have a good one.
All right, you too. Bye.
All right. That's what I got for you today. And remember, it's not all about living to work. It's all about working to live, if you need to do the work. But work can be fun, and it should be fueling for your life. So if you enjoyed what you just heard, if you got some nuggets of wisdom that you want to share, or you're just noodling on right now, please go tell others the way that people find this show and how you can help others get their aha moments is through word of mouth. So if it is telling your friend, telling your family, sending an email to your list, writing a review, or whatever it might be. Everything helps. So thank you so much for listening to the Hustle and Flowchart podcast, and I will see you next time.